Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with, as always, my regular guest, Representative John Barker from the 70th District, and our special guest, which is today, of course, Jim Denning from the 8th District, Senate Majority Leader. Jim, always appreciate it when you take time to come from the legislature and come in and be on the show. We always appreciate it because you always bring in some charts, some information that helps us understand something on the financial end of it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Enjoy it.
Sure, I appreciate that. John, another week's done. This was supposed to be a short week, and I guess it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but exactly. A lot went on in that short period of time.
You know, it was a busy 3 days. We got off. We spent 4 days off, turnaround. We've talked about turnaround before, and so we're starting the second half of our session. And so I went up Tuesday night. We were in the House early Wednesday morning. We had committee meetings, and I had a committee meeting on Thursday with Fed and State. But we've had a couple of bills. One was sent over to us by the Senate, Senate Bill 22. It came to the Tax Committee, the House Tax Committee, which I'm on, and we amended two other bills into it, the Internet sales tax and a cut in food sales tax. So we got it to the floor yesterday and debated it for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. Pretty heavily debated. A number of amendments were offered by the other side. We kept the bill clean, and it did pass this morning. Yesterday, I believe we had 80 votes. Today, some of our members, the flu's kind of going around, and some of our members were homesick. So today it passed 76 to 43. It will go back now to the Senate, and the Senate will decide whether to concur or agree with the House amendments or non-concur in a conference committee. And Jim will probably, I hope, touch on more about the essence of Senate Bill 22 in a little bit. But the governor today signed Senate Bill 9. Senate Bill 9, if you recall, is the bill where we had not made a CAPERS obligation a couple of years ago, about $115 million. Our revenues were up, so the Senate sent the bill out. I believe it came out of the Senate unanimously.
It did.
Right. And the House, we passed it unanimously and sent it to the governor. I thought the governor was going to sign it fairly quickly because it was costing the state $24,000 a day, but she waited until today. She signed it this morning, which was the last day. It would have become law tomorrow without her signature, or she could have vetoed it and sent it back. I'm glad that she did sign it, so we've got that out of her way, and I think even today she has some good things to say about it. I just wish she'd have said those good things last week and saved us maybe $240,000.
Well, John, you know, from a layman's standpoint here, what is the rationale? That I understand this part. If you had used the money and hadn't applied it towards the CAPERS, over a 30-year time would have cost the state about $7.4 million.
No, that's
billion.
That's the reamortization.
That's the reamortization.
This is just a payment. I think it was on 2016. We did not make a full payment, so it was costing us. We had 7.75% interest. So when the revenues came in this year, the Senate, probably from the advice of the House, ran the bill to pay that first because we understood what it was costing every day, $24,000 a day. The majority leader in the Senate, Senator Denning here, got that rounded up and passed out of the Senate, sent it over to us. We were able to get it passed and send it to the governor. Of course, if she'd have waited 10 days and not signed it, it would have become law, or she could have vetoed it. But she waited until the last day, and she may have reasons for that. I mean, I don't know. I don't go into her mind, but I'm glad that she did sign it because we've got that. That helps on our unfunded actuarial and CAPERS. But Senate Bill 22, I read the paper in the Capitol Journal this morning. It says, legislature cuts taxes on food and corporations. That is true, but there's other parts. Individuals, if we had not taken some action, would have paid more in income taxes this year than they did last year because of the federal tax cuts and the larger exemptions that the federal government had put in that. So we kind of uncoupled, and Jim can talk more about that, uncoupled from the federal, so that now folks in Kansas under state taxes will be able to do their deductions. Correct, Jim?
That is
If you
correct.
talk some more about that.
Yeah, they Kansans can continue to itemize their tax returns if we get this bill passed, Senate Bill 22.
And if that hadn't have happened, then of course the taxpayers would have paid more money. So there was more to the story that you mentioned, John, than what was in the Topeka Daily Capital with it.
As far as the front page.
Yeah, as far as the front page.
The bill does a lot of good things. You know, they're talking about corporate tax breaks. Well, they're not really. You have international corporations. Corporations in the United States have companies in France or Italy or wherever that make money, and they were unable or had to pay a penalty to bring it back to the states and invest it here. They can invest it overseas. With the federal legislation, they were able to bring it back in the states with a less of 86 to present is what that period
That's
was.
about right.
About right. And they could bring that back and pay less taxes, but they're bringing the money back to the state so it could be invested here.
Sure, that makes sense.
And then going forward, and at some point in time, I hope Jim talks about, it's an interesting term that we use, guilty, but it's a government term, about going forward what corporations can do and stuff. But overall, I think it could be a boost for Kansans, and Kansans will not be paying more taxes, because without this legislation, they would pay more taxes because they could not itemize.
Okay. All right, we're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. As you're looking at your screen, on your left is John Barker, representative from the 70th District. And in the middle, in between us, is Jim Denning, Senate Majority Leader from the 8th District, which would be the Overland Park area. Is that right?
That is correct,
Okay.
Overland Park.
All right, Jim, refreshing the memory of those who are watching, what does a Senate Majority Leader do?
Sure. Doug, what my job is when the committees finish their work and the chairmans, like John's a chairman of Fed and State, when he gets a bill passed out, the majority leader in the House prioritizes when that bill will come up, what we call above the line, to be debated by the full House. And the same thing happens in the Senate when our chairman and chairwomen finish getting a bill ready to be debated. They'll send it out to what's called the calendar, and the calendar has a thick line drawn across the top of it. And when the majority leader feels like the bill's ready to be debated by the entire Senate, we move that bill above the line, and that's called general orders. And that's when we start debating. Any bill above the line gets worked and has the potential to become law or defeated.
Do you have the ability, Jim, from your position there, to say this bill goes up, this bill doesn't go up?
We do. The majority leader, there's a lot of times that a bill may have come out of committee and more due diligence might be needed. And it's not unusual for a majority leader to leave the bill on the calendar and let it absolutely die. That is to say, never become debated.
Okay. All right. And we were talking, John was talking in the first segment about Senate Bill 22. What input can you add to Senate Bill 22?
Yes, Senate Bill 22 obviously started in the Senate, and it had two major components in the Senate. The first component was giving Kansas the ability to continue to itemize on their federal tax return, on their Kansas tax return following the federal tax policy change. And the second thing that we sent over was because of the federal tax policy change, there was a corporate tax called repatriation, and then another ongoing tax, which the abbreviation is GILTI, which stands for Global Intangible Tax. So the Global Intangible Tax is very complicated. It's not all income. Some of it is depreciable assets, buildings. But when the feds change the tax policy, Kansas corporations are going to be receiving that GILTI income. It's never been taxed in Kansas, and we didn't want to tax it. So the piece in the Senate version of Senate Bill 22 was allow Kansans to continue to itemize on their state tax returns, and then not tax that foreign income coming in from the repatriation. And then when the House got it, they added two pieces to it. They added a 1% food sales tax reduction. Governor Kelly ran on that as a campaign promise. So what the House did was they added a 1% sales tax reduction on food, which is about a $67 million relief to consumers. And then to make this fairness issue, we've talked about internet sales not being taxed like brick and mortar retail sales are taxed. So the House added that internet sales tax, which says large internet sellers like Amazon and so forth would now be collecting taxes rather than the consumer having to keep track of their internet sales and report the tax individually. So those were the four major pieces. And the bottom line on the itemization is about, if we don't get Senate Bill 22 passed, about 150,000 Kansans who typically itemize won't be able to, and it'll cost them between $333 and $800 more. So it'll be a stealth tax increase. And for most folks in that middle class, that's a car payment, a rent payment, a house payment, or a month of groceries. So
yeah.
it's not a small amount. It's substantial.
Well, it sounds like it.
Yeah, it is.
And so, John, where do you anticipate this going from here?
Well, it goes back. It went back to the Senate. I think it was read in this morning. The Senate will have to make a decision. Senator Denning will, along with the Senate President, on whether they will concur or agree to the House amendments, or they will non-concur and ask for a conference committee, and then the conference committees will work out the finer details of it. I would hope, if it gets to the governor, that she will sign it, because people are preparing their taxes now, and they'll probably have to do a supplemental later on if we get this passed, but without it, they're going to pay more money.
Yeah, so they'll have to come back to an amended tax return or something probably.
Right.
What about the 1 cent sales tax comes off? Well, how does that get made up? Where's that come from? Is that off of that internet?
They projected the internet's going to bring in $30 to $70 million. The sales tax on food is about $60 million.
That's about right.
So hopefully that will offset each other as good as we can get, as close as we can get, I guess.
All right, we're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with, as always, my special guest, John Barker, and our special guest today, Jim Denning. And Jim, one of the things that comes up, I see it all the time, and it's almost a weekly deal, is the school financing. Has that been addressed? Anything come up about that in the past week or two?
Well, I'm glad you asked about that question. We've been dealing with school finance litigation going on 50 years in the state of Kansas. The Supreme Court has ruled against Kansas, I believe it's 8 to 10 times, saying that we haven't put enough money in our K-12 public school system. We made lots of effort over the last 2 years to get additional funding into our schools. The number is approaching $1 billion in new money from last year to fiscal year 23. It's right at $1 billion. And the last time the courts looked at it was over the summer, and they again ruled against the state, saying that they wanted additional money for inflation. Our Department of Education calculated the additional money at $90 million, which is a very big sum of money. It's about 50% of what Kansas collects in taxes on an annual basis, so it's a very big number. We thought we had an agreement with all the parties that $90 million would solve this litigation, and we could put it behind us for once and get on to other parts of the budget that needs addressing. Then on the day before we were going to work the bill, which is Senate Bill 142, there was a group called Schools for Fair Funding, and they represent the plaintiff schools that have been suing the state. The plaintiff schools, I believe, are Wichita, Kansas City, Kansas, Dodge City, and Hutchinson. And at the last moment, their attorney and lobbyists came in and said that they wanted 4 times that much to settle the litigation. 4 times that figure is around $360 million. It would bankrupt the state, but they changed their position and threatening to continue the litigation. We went ahead and passed out Senate Bill 142 yesterday, and we'll debate it on the floor, and we feel that that will satisfy the litigation. But if those attorneys want to sue us and the Supreme Court agrees with them like they have been, we could be forced to either put that much money in, which will cut other parts of the budget, or the Supreme Court always threatens to close our school. Mm-hmm. So it's something that we thought we had an agreement with, but the attorneys for the plaintiffs that are suing us at the last moment changed their mind. And just to put it into perspective, and then I'll let John fill in some blanks, is we're going to put in $195 million in new money next year, and the growth of sales the growth of taxes collected in Kansas is 194 million. So we've dedicated 100% of all the new tax revenue that the state of Kansas can project for one entire year to try to settle this school finance case once and for all. Even though we made that huge commitment, the plaintiff attorneys came back the day before we ran the bill wanting 3 times that amount.
My comment was, this came out from the Department of Education. This was their recommendation.
Yes.
They did all the evaluation, and I understand that the governor was on board with this.
The governor took their number and
put it in. So, I mean, this is the governor's number. The Senate took the governor's number, and then the attorneys came back in, and lobbyists said, no, not good enough.
Not enough.
It's never enough, Doug. The attorney in this case has represented the school districts for, at my knowledge, at least 20, 25 years, from the 83, 85, one of the first school finance cases. But I don't know where they expect us to get the money from.
Yeah,
well, they expect us to go back to the taxpayer, put another huge tax on them, and say, okay, we can get the revenue because the taxpayer has to pay it.
That just doesn't sound like a good plan. Jim, you brought with you in today a chart. I bragged about you that you'd be bringing a chart in. What are we looking at? What am I looking at?
Sure. Now that we're back from turnaround, we're going to be processing lots of major legislation, but the budget being one. And the graph I've got here is a graph of electricity rates in the state of Kansas. The red bar is KCP&L, and then this yellow bar is Westar, but they're both based in Kansas. And you can see that Kansas utility cost, electricity, are about 1/3 higher than our surrounding states. So a lot of businesses are complaining that they can't expand because the electricity rates are too high. Obviously, residential folks are complaining because they can't keep up. Inflation with their fixed income checks can't keep up with that type of inflation on the utilities. So we've got several bills in play right now. One is to simply do a study from an outside party to see where we got off track and how we can get back on track. There's some other bills that are fairly complicated that have to do with depreciation and tax, where utility companies are able to pass along any kind of tax that they're required to pay. But in Kansas, our utility companies have so much depreciation and other things that they're not projected to pay tax at least through 2029, I believe, but they're still getting credit for that as if they were paying it. So we have a bill that says you have to pass that savings on to the residential payers unless you actually do pay the tax. So very complicated, but we are going to try to get back on track and see if we can get our electricity rates more competitive, so consumers can have a little bit more money for other things, and then businesses can expand here in Kansas rather than going to another manufacturing facility that they may have in Oklahoma. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
So if you're successful with that, you would anticipate in the chart, the red and the yellow that you just have, those would drop closer in line with the other states.
Yeah, just real simple numbers. We pay about 13 cents per kilowatt hour. We need to pay around 10 cents, and that's what our goal is, to get us down to around 10 cents.
All right, hope you can accomplish that. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to our final segment of Legislative Updates. As always, John Barker is with me, and in the middle between us is Jim Denning from the Senate Majority Leader from the Senate. And Jim, memory serves me right, you and John went into the legislature about the same time, didn't you? And you were at the House for a while, and then moved over to the Senate?
We came in at almost the same time. I believe I came into the House 2 years,
2 years
before
earlier,
John came.
right? But you went to the Senate and I came to the House at the same time.
Yeah.
And he's a great gentleman to work with.
Yeah, he's a great guy to have here. And matter of fact, you can contact either of these individuals because on the screen right now will be that chart that Jim was talking about before, the contact information for Jim Denning and for John Barker. You'll be able to contact them, make contact with them if you have questions. Ask them. That's one of the reasons that we do legislative updates, because John comes straight from the legislature on Friday, and that's when we're filming this. Comes straight from the legislature and comes here. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks
All
for
right,
having me.
thank you, Jim.